everybody, I'm Karen Hartglass, and it's time for another episode of It's All About Food. You know, one of the things I love to talk about on this program is tuning in love, connecting the dots with food and love, because I believe love is the only thing that really matters, and love heals. And we're going to really focus a lot on that subject. I want to say some of my favorite people, one definitely favorite person who I've known for a long time, and then somebody that I'm just meeting right now. So here we go with Reshma Shah Md Mph, a board-certified pediatrician and an affiliate clinical instructor at Stanford University School of Medicine. She received her undergraduate and graduate degrees from Johns Hopkins University and her medical degree from Drexel University College of Medicine. She has additional training and certification in plant-based nutrition and cooking. She lives in the Bay Area with her husband and 2 children. Most Sundays you can find her at the local farmers market, where she finds inspiration for weekly family meals. And my dear friend and colleague, Brenda Davis Rd, who is widely regarded as a rock star of plant-based nutrition. She has been a featured speaker at medical and nutrition conferences around the world, and is the prolific author of 11 vegetarian and vegan nutrition classics, including Becoming Vegan Comprehensive Edition and Becoming Vegan Express Edition. In 2007, she was inducted into the Vegetarian Hall of Fame, and she lives in Calgary with her husband, Paul. She has 2 grown children and 2 beautiful grandchildren. Hello, Brenda and Reshma.
Hi. And you know what, Karen, it's now 12 books because of the book that I just did with Reshma, the Nourish book.
There we go. Well, we're going to be talking about the 12th book, Nourish, the definitive plant-based nutrition guide for families. I want to say that your book, Becoming Vegan, the comprehensive edition, which you did with Vasanto Molina, is something that I go to all the time. You know, it's so easy when we have a question to just go in the Google search bar and look for something, but you can never really find, unless you really do a lot of work, what you're looking for. And I find that most of the answers that I need about food and nutrition are right there in that book.
Oh, thank you.
It's a great resource.
I'm so glad.
I definitely use it a lot. And I mean, I imagine the knowledge we have about nutrition changes over time, but I think that's just a great foundation of information. So thank you for doing that.
Well,
this book, Nourish, the definitive plant-based nutrition guide for families, the key word here is definitive. And I don't know you, Dr. Shah, but I do know Brenda, and all of her work is always definitive.
I would agree.
Okay, so can you just tell me how you 2 got together and why you decided to write this book?
So just like you, I think Becoming Vegan, the comprehensive edition, was an enormous resource for me. So I have known of Brenda for a really long time. And several years ago, I was actually just looking this up. It was in 2016. I was on an airplane from San Francisco flying down for a plant-based nutrition conference. And it just so happened that Brenda Davis was sitting next to me on the airplane. So it was an extreme coincidence. And, you know, she introduced herself. She's so humble. She said, "Oh, I'm Brenda Davis." And I thought to myself, I know exactly who you are. And I can't believe I'm sitting right next to you. And so we just started chatting, and, you know, the inklings of a friendship started to form. And she ended up giving me a ride to the hotel, and the conversations kind of continued. And then we sort of emailed back and forth for about a year, just kind of keeping in touch, because I knew in whatever way, I wanted to know Brenda. And then the following year, we met at the conference again, and, you know, the friendship just developed a little bit more. And at the very last day of the conference, we were having breakfast together, and I was just asking Brenda for some professional advice. You know, she truly is a pioneer in the space. And when she talks about all the challenges that she faced we think we have it hard in terms of trying to convince people about the benefits of a plant-based or vegan lifestyle. She really had to do some convincing, because there weren't the resources, the sense of community, and even all just the information that we have now. And so I was asking for her for a bit of professional advice, sort of, how did you do this? I had the idea of doing something like this, but I wouldn't even know where to begin. And Brenda sort of said, well, we could do it together. And I remember very vividly, I was just bursting with excitement, and I caught, you know, a car back to the airport. And while I was waiting for my flight, I started drafting the notes for the book.
Well, I want to say there are no coincidences.
That's for sure.
This was meant to be.
It was. It was so funny, Karen, because I was flying with a friend, Lily, And she took the aisle seat, I took the window seat, and we purposefully left the middle seat. We thought nobody's going to want to be in a middle seat. We'll put all our stuff there. And then, of course, the plane was absolutely packed. But we were so delighted when it ended up being Reshma right between us. So.
I've met some very interesting people on the plane, just a handful of times that I know it was not a coincidence. I was supposed to connect with this person. All right, let's just jump in. I love the foreword by Dr. David Katz. And he talks about food for love. And this is such a special connection, which you say in the book. I'm even going to read what you wrote. While the primary focus will be on the health promoting aspects of a plant-based diet, we will also discuss the many benefits beyond our individual plates. Sustainability, compassion, and allocation of resources may seem outside the typical realm of a book by two healthcare professionals, but we contend that because of our roles in caring for families, this is precisely the place where such a conversation should be had. It's just like whole food, where we have to consider the whole body. When we talk about nutrition, we have to consider the whole planet and everything that it involves.
Absolutely.
So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And thank you for mentioning the foreword by Dr. David Katz. We knew that he would write a good foreword for the book because he's such a talented writer. But Brenda and I were both so touched because what his words revealed to me is that he truly understood what we were trying to do with this book. You know, it is an informative book. It's full of information that can help parents be successful in this endeavor. But at the end of the day, we wanted to sort of connect all those pieces, just like you said. And it is about love. And the fact that he sort of understood that and got that meant so much to us.
And articulated it so beautifully. It was just a real gift for sure.
Now, Brenda, you've written a number of books on how to be vegan, whether it's a raw vegan or just a regular old vegan, and the health aspects that are related to this. This book is not preaching to be vegan. This book is very comprehensive. It's all inclusive, accepting people no matter where they are on the food continuum. Why did you choose to do that?
We really wanted no one to feel excluded. We just wanted for people to know that wherever they were at, if they were, moving in a direction of trying to incorporate more plants, fewer animal products, that this book would help support them in that process. And so we didn't want people to feel judged or that, they're not doing well enough for this to be their tribe. We just really want to be more inclusive because for me, I guess it's about wanting this to be as mainstream as possible. And I really believe that once people start on this path, they just keep taking steps in the right direction. And of course, the ultimate goal is to do whatever we can do to make this world a kinder, more compassionate place where we're not using and abusing animals, where we're not creating pain, suffering, and death where we don't have to. And so we really thought it was important to be inclusive. Reshma, you may want to add to that.
Yeah, and I think, as someone who used to eat animals at one point, I actually grew up in a vegetarian household. So I can't even claim that I didn't know any better, right? Because it's the way I was brought up. But as someone who ate animals before, I have a lot of empathy for people who are trying or are not ready to look at it. Our approach, we really wanted to be an invitation rather than a set of rules. And that's really what we try to do every step of the way. But I think Brenda and I are also both very clear that we aim to eat a vegan diet. We don't shy away from that label because it feels very comfortable for us. And one of the things that we highlighted in the book is, if you find a label to be useful of your efforts, like if it feels supportive for you to call yourself a vegetarian or a vegan or plant-based, the label to us doesn't matter as much. So yeah, I think it's about just offering a lot of support. And also the other thing that was really important to both of us is that we wanted it to be evidence-based, right? It is grounded in what science tells us. We're not sort of making this up. And so the recommendations have to be that way. And one of the things that Brenda and I can say is that in terms of the health aspects, it certainly makes sense to be plant-centered and plant-based, but we couldn't say you absolutely must be 100% vegan in order to be healthy. There are other reasons to consider those choices. And so we wanted to sort of offer that to parents and families and let them begin in whatever way feels reasonable to them.
I like that you call it an invitation.
Yeah. And that word came to me because of the challenges I faced with my own family. So my family was not fully, they were very accommodating and very supportive, but they weren't gung-ho. And when I pushed, it didn't really work. But when I invited, it tended to go more smoothly.
You talk about what is a plant-based diet. Maybe we could talk a little bit about this. Now, one exciting thing about the vegan diet going mainstream is that more people are accepting the idea that plants are important. And a lot of people have latched onto this plant-based diet phrase. I think some people have abused it and maybe misconstrued it, because I review a lot of programs and some of them call themselves plant-based and yet they're incorporating tons of animal products. You talk about plant-based. What is plant-based to you?
I think the reason that we chose the term plant-based throughout the book is because it does feel a little bit more inviting. Like, I can be plant-based. It doesn't mean I have to be perfect. To me, plant-based means that the focus and the center of your diet is on plant foods. And there's a little bit of room, or, a lot of room, depending on where you are, for some more heavily processed and even for some animal foods, because I think it is a bridge. It is a pathway to move forward. And plant-based for us felt like a more encompassing word, because you didn't have to be perfect in order to be there. But it is, the center and the foundation is on whole plant foods like vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, legumes, nuts, seeds. That's kind of what we're talking about.
And I think, Karen, to be perfectly fair, plant-based is not necessarily plant exclusive. And so, for example, all of the blue zones in the world are plant-based. So Okinawa, Japan, and the Nicoya Peninsula, and Sardinia, Italy, and Icaria, Greece, and Loma Linda, California. But none of them are strictly plant exclusive. And so actually I had a discussion with one of the leading researchers from Harvard, Dr. Frank Hu, about this topic. And he gets so upset that the vegan world has co-opted the term plant-based to mean vegan. And he said, it's not necessarily vegan. It can be, plant-based can be plant exclusive, but it can also be plant predominant. And so we really do need to recognize this. I think most people who are doing whole food plant-based diets are doing vegan diets. But the reason to call it plant-based is because it feels less daunting somehow to be plant-based, and less, fervent, if you will, to be plant-based. And so I think it's important to recognize truly that the distinction, plant-based is not necessarily plant exclusive, but it can be.
This book is the definitive plant-based guide, nutrition guide for families. And one of the things I really enjoyed that you pointed out, I'm going to read another paragraph from the book. Many parents and health professionals find themselves stuck on the words, in quotes, appropriately planned, and fear that such planning is beyond the reach of busy families with limited resources. We contend that all diets for children need to be appropriately planned, and while a plant-based diet for children may require some care and consideration, it is no more than any parent would give in feeding their child a balanced and appropriate diet. Thank you, and thank you. There's so many little media sound bites that we get all the time that, it's so difficult to feed a child that on a vegan diet. It has to be so carefully planned. All diets should be carefully planned. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, as a pediatrician, I have treated kids for nutrient deficiencies that were not plant-based. Iron deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, all these things. And I think on both ends of the spectrum, you can run into problems. So for people who say that vegan or plant-based diets are too difficult because they have to be so well planned, that's problematic. But on the other end, saying, well, I eat a whole food plant-based diet, so I don't have to worry about anything because all my bases are covered, that can also be a little dangerous. So I think, yes, there is some planning. You may have to take a supplement or two, but it's not a big deal, especially when you consider how fortified our food supply is. Most industrialized countries, we fortify cow's milk with vitamin D and vitamin A. We fortify infant cereal with iron. So I think this idea that because it requires some supplementation, that somehow it's an inferior diet is just not accurate.
Enough said on that subject. And if you want to know more, you need to read this book, Nourish. You simplify things a lot, which I really appreciate because, nutrition can be a very complicated subject. And if you study it, we're learning new things like every few minutes. There's just so much to learn. But when it comes to eating, it's really not that complicated. And you write that there are two primary prerequisites for a healthy diet. The diet must be nutritionally adequate. The diet must provide the necessary amounts of macronutrients and micronutrients humans require to both survive and thrive. And two, the diet must minimize risk of chronic disease. The diet must be designed to minimize the risk of death and disability induced by our leading killers, such as heart disease, cancer, and type 2 diabetes. Done.
Exactly. And you want, with children, you want to be supporting a healthy relationship with food. That's so important. You want to make it as joyful and as much enhancing family connectedness through meals. All of those things come into play. But in the end, from a nutrition perspective, the number one priority for children, for infants and toddlers and children, is always adequate growth and development. The other priority that we have to consider is minimizing lifetime risk of all of these chronic diseases that are lifestyle induced. And one of the things that I think is so funny is that we dramatically criticize people who are feeding a plant-based diet to their children when they're growing up. And yet we think nothing of children growing up on, McDonald's burgers and fries and sodas and all of these Western style diet foods that are absolutely ultra processed and ultimately dramatically increasing risk of disease, and in fact are often leading to micronutrient deficiencies as well, and certainly deficiencies of things like fiber, which promote a healthy gut microbiome, which is so critical to the health of every body system that we have. And so it's interesting how, because there may be a lack of B12 in unfortified plant foods, we automatically say, oh, this diet isn't good enough. But a diet that is so grossly inadequate and promotes overconsumption and overnutrition and everything else is somehow okay. As parents, we need to see through that, provide our children with more.
Okay, I have a bunch of questions from reading the book that I just wanted to ask you because I'm a little selfish and I like to learn things. So I have the authors right here. Now I can just ask you things that I want to know. I loved the whole resistance starch thing when I first started reading about it. It was so much fun to learn about a food that can go through your body and you're really not getting the calories from it and it's feeding your colon, and it just seemed like a great thing. Now, I understand, and you say in the book, that resistant starch is present in starchy foods such as potatoes or rice that have been cooked and cooled. So I have a couple of questions. If I cook a potato and I let it cool and then I warm it up again, does it still have the resistant starch in it?
It does. It does. And so it's like the starch granules kind of crystallize in a certain way. And what it does is it essentially reduces the glycemic impact of that food. So you'll see, a potato with quite a high glycemic index. The glycemic index is lowered considerably if it's cooled, and then if it's reheated, and I'm not sure the exact numbers, but it would still retain some of that advantage.
Yeah, that's kind of exciting, because some experts are telling us not to eat white potatoes and rice, and it's good to know that it's not such a bad choice if it's cooked and then cooled.
You know what? It's not such a bad choice, period. I disagree. I think white rice and white flour and all of those things are fairly refined foods. Potatoes, they come out of the ground. I think the problem with potatoes and why the research shows so much, adverse outcomes with potato intake is because most of the potatoes people eat have been soaked in fat before they're eaten. They're deep fried as French fries, they're deep fried as potato chips, and even baked potatoes, they're loaded with butter and sour cream and all of this crap. It's not the potato that's the problem, especially when it's still got its skin on. If you're adding, a spicy black bean peanut sauce to your potato, it's all good, So I think we need to rethink potatoes from that vantage point.
I just want to say this was a moment of Brenda Davis and her passion for potatoes.
I think the potatoes, they can add a lot of enjoyment to the food. So if I make for dinner, sometimes I'll make a tofu scramble with some roasted veggies and I'll have some roasted potatoes, and kids just like it. And I think very rarely people are just eating a bowl of potatoes. It's usually served with other things that are high in fiber, high in nutrients. So I think demonizing, especially whole foods, it doesn't really help us.
No. It makes it more difficult.
Yeah.
It makes being vegan or plant-based or whatever you want to call it, it makes it more difficult because it's like saying, well, no nuts and seeds, no, none of this, none of this, none of this. It just makes life so much more difficult. Some of the most wonderful non-dairy sort of dairy replacements are nut and seed based, and they're the ones that taste most delicious, and they give so much more variety to the diet. And the vast majority of studies I've ever seen on nuts and seeds show that they provide a huge advantage to human health. So I think we need to be careful about getting too extreme. And I have to say this, Karen, too, that I have seen in the last few months, probably maybe 3-4 people who have developed really severe orthorexia following rigidly plant-based diets, eliminating fats, and actually one of them weighed about 68 pounds at 5'4", another one another two in the 90-pound range, and their health was so threatened by taking this diet to an extreme that is really just unhealthy. And so I think we need to be careful of being overly restrictive in our dietary pattern.
That's the rock star Brenda Davis, dietitian, who knows the best of everything, the most words of wisdom we can hear. And I agree with you. I know there's been a lot of pushback on eating fat and eating nuts and seeds. And I'm right there with you. We love our cashew cream and we love our potatoes. It makes everything yummy. All right, let's talk about B12. We've known, the vegans of the world who are concerned about good health, have known that we need to supplement with B12. But there's some new information and I'm kind of confused about it. And you write in your book that as of January 2020, the daily value for the vitamin B12 was changed from 6 micrograms to 2.4. Why was that change and how does it matter to us?
Well, it was changed just because the RDA is 2.4. And so it just reflects most of the DVs are based on the RDA. And so I'm not sure why B12 was set at 6 micrograms to start with, but to be very honest with you, most of the evidence is pointing to a greater needs for B12 than what the RDA is. So it's 2.4 micrograms for adults, and the research is showing that probably we need more like 4 to 7 micrograms. And in fact, the European Food Safety Authority has set their recommended intakes closer to that ideal range. And I think that we probably should be following suit. And if that happens, then I would suspect the DV would be upped again. Let's say we make the RDA 4 or 4.5 or whatever it is, then we may readjust that DV again.
The other confusing thing with B12 is when we see these daily values as of how much we need, and then we buy a supplement that has like 100 times more, and we say, why am I taking this much more?
Yeah, and that's one thing we do in the book is actually explain that by showing the percentage of vitamin B12 that would be absorbed if you take in 1 microgram. You'd absorb about 50%. But as you go towards, say, 1,000 micrograms, you might get 1% or 1.3%. So the amount that you actually absorb when you're taking a large dose is really very, very small. And B12 tends not to be a very, a dangerous vitamin. Although some people, when they're taking a lot on a regular basis, like let's say taking 1,000 micrograms every day, I have seen people who have developed acne, and there can be some repercussions. But generally, it's thought it's not a fat soluble vitamin, so it's one of the nutrients that we don't worry as much about having too much of.
Karen, I agree with you. I've asked this to Brenda all the time because she is the expert, but there's such controversy about, whether it's 4 micrograms or 7 micrograms, but the doses that we're taking in reality, it's such a high dose that at a practical level, I don't know that it changes much for people.
Thank you for that clarification. So in your wonderful book, Nourish, we learn about what's appropriate for a pregnant woman to eat, and then for her infant, her toddler, her growing child, her teenager, and you touch on so many of the challenges that will occur during each of these stages, and you approach it all with love and compassion with your recommendations. So if people are looking for that kind of information, it's all in this book. Oh, you mentioned acne with B12. Can we talk about diet and acne? Because all health illnesses are problematic and challenging, but acne, I think, is such a difficult thing because it typically comes at a very challenging time in the teenage life, which is very emotional and hormonal, and we really care about how we look, and our bodies are just like changing so fast, and everything is so confusing, and then our face explodes. And it doesn't have to.
So I will say that part of acne is, there's so many hormonal fluctuations during puberty. So part of it is just from that. There's not really much you can do about that. I also think, it's a family history thing. So it kind of, the way that you sort of go through puberty may be related to your family history. There are a lot of sort of myths and misconceptions about food and acne. And we look specifically at this, and the 2 things that we found in terms of diet that are related to acne most often are cow's milk dairy, like just dairy foods, and foods with a high glycemic load. So eating like really processed sugary foods, those 2 things have been associated with acne. Now, everyone's going to have their sort of own individual things. So if you notice every time I eat X, my acne flares, then that might be something you want to sort of watch. But one of the things I would recommend is in teens and adolescents who have significant acne is, I never say you have to do this, but I offer, you could try 2 to 3 weeks off of dairy and let's see if it makes any changes. It's not going to, I never make promises like it's going to clear up 100%, but let's try and see what happens. And it's not 100%. For some teens, it may make a difference, and for some teens, it may not. But for the teens that it does, they're sort of committed, like, yeah, it really cleared up my sin. I think I can. And nowadays, there's so many dairy alternatives. It doesn't feel like you're really missing out on things. So I would say dairy and high glycemic foods are the 2 that I might sort of look out for in terms of acne.
Okay, that's good to know. We just have a few more minutes left. Brenda, can you talk about your bones? I think your bone story is so important, and people need to hear it and hear the truth.
It's funny because my mom developed osteoporosis when she was diagnosed at about 50 years of age, and I'll be 62 in January, so I'm, in my early 60s. And when I was probably about 50, I thought it's time to go and get my bone density checked and just see, because that was about the age my mom developed osteoporosis. And at that point, I had been, largely vegetarian, mostly vegan for probably close to 25 years. And so anyway, went into my doctor and asked if I could have a DEXA scan, and he said, sure, why? And I told him, I'm vegan, my mom has osteoporosis, and I'm, a small white female. It'd just be really nice to know where I'm at. And anyway, about 2 weeks later, I go into his office to get the results, and he opened my chart and his jaw just dropped. He said that my bone density was so high they couldn't plot it on the chart. They had to put an arrow at the top showing where it was. It was my spine, I think, was 2.5 standard deviations above norm for my age. And just so people know, osteoporosis is 2.5 standard deviations below norm for your age. And then my big leg bones, femurs were like 2 standard deviations. And so he said, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. And I'll tell you what I was doing. I was basically I always made sure to include plenty of sources, good sources of calcium in my diet. So, the fortified non-dairy milks and all the low oxalate greens and almond butter, just all of that stuff. But I also take care with the other nutrients that are important for bones. So we need vitamin D. We have to make sure there's a source of vitamin D there. But we need zinc. We need omega-3 fatty acids. We need potassium. We need magnesium. We need, all of these other nutrients that contribute. Boron, flax seeds are a wonderful source. All of these nutrients are really important to bone health. But the most important thing for bone health, and I think this is why my bones were so strong, is that we are sending a message to our bones that they need to stay strong. And you do that with weight-bearing exercise. And I think from the time I was about 17 years old, I made exercise a part of my daily life. And so regardless of what's going on, unless I'm really sick, I'm figuring out a way to get some exercise in. And so it might be a run, or, my husband and I might go for a rollerblade or a bike or something like that. I might do a fitness class, but I'm always doing weight-bearing exercises. And my husband just discovered the other day these weighted vests. So we're starting to wear these weighted vests as well around the house, which I think can, it's just signaling your bones to stay strong. So I think it's sad when vegans end up with very low bone density when they don't necessarily have to. And I know some people have a family history of low, a very strong increased risk. But generally, if you do the exercise and you eat a really healthy diet that's loaded with micronutrients, it'll be good.
So I just wanted to ask you one more thing, and that is any advice for us during this pandemic with coronavirus, supplementation, things that we should be doing that could help?
I think in terms of looking for a magic supplement or a magic pill that's going to either prevent you from getting coronavirus or make you, bounce back quickly is not out there. I think the general rules of eating a balanced diet with a lot of variety, eating the rainbow of colors, not the Skittles rainbow, but, the peppers and the broccoli and all those variety of foods, and just, trying to make sure you're getting all your nutrients in. In terms of, prevention with taking these megadoses of vitamin C or vitamin zinc or zinc or things like that, I don't think that there's enough evidence, but I do think that, a healthy diet can, help us to fight these infections in a way just by maintaining our overall health.
Okay, well, we're done. We have no more time left. I just want to wrap this up. And thank you so much for joining me, Brenda and Reshma. What a wonderful book and so important in this time. Thank you for joining me on It's All About Food.
Thanks so much for having us.
The future of food is plants.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Stay well.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. That was Brenda Davis and Reshma Shah, everybody. I can't tell you enough how much I love Brenda, and getting to know Reshma through this interview and reading her book. I'm really excited to know her, happy to know her, and glad both of them are doing the work that they're doing because it's really important. And now I want to bring on Gary DiMattei. Gary.
Karen, that was a great interview.
I also want to say you're really important, so thanks for joining me.
And I think you're really important, Karen. And I think you're really important for bringing this book to the attention of your listeners, because I think it's really amazing. Nourish, the definitive plant-based nutrition guide for families, with tips and recipes for bringing health, joy, and connection to your dinner table. Boy, do we need connection at our dinner tables, don't we?
We do, and I like how some have called it radical compassion. And this is such an important element that over the decades we have been getting further and further from when it comes to food and all the things that are connected to food that they talk about in this book.
Food and advice, expert advice, and a nutrition guide for families that are plant-based or simply plant curious is one of the ways that the publisher has explained the book. I'm fascinated by it.
Are you plant curious?
Plant curious. I mean, but how many people out there are plant curious, haven't really gone the full plant-based diet route yet, but are curious about it? Might be a great gift for the holidays.
I think this is a great gift, especially for people that are raising young children, teenagers. There's a lot of wonderful information in here, not just about the important food to eat, the nutrients we need, how to put it on the table, but all the emotional issues that surround food.
Emotional issues. That's well said, Karen. Emotional issues that surround food. There are so many. It also talks about how a diet centered around plants can optimize health, prevent chronic disease, care for our planet, and be an act of radical compassion.
I love that.
Radical compassion. We need some radical compassion, don't we, in the world?
I remember when I first decided I didn't want to eat meat, and my mom was nervous. I was about 15, and she brought me to our family doctor. And a lot of us have these going to the family doctor classic story saying we don't want to eat meat anymore. And my very slim, tan, very self-absorbed doctor, he told me not to worry about eating meat because when we raise cows for meat, we're giving them life. And that was it. There was a lot lacking there.
Wow, that's arrogance.
There was arrogance. There was no understanding of how we were raising animals. This was a long time ago. But he didn't care. He didn't want to know. There was no radical compassion here.
Isn't there a lot of arrogance, though, in the medical profession? I mean, isn't that part of it?
It's a rumor, I've heard.
Yeah.
And
This doesn't sound like a very arrogant book. This sounds like a real loving and compassionate book. Maybe even a radically compassionate book.
I don't know what doctors were like 50, 60 years ago, but when we see movies and we read books, there's this romantic notion about the family doctor who would do house calls, knew your family, knew your grandparents, knew the babies, knew the generations, and that was an important element because this doctor was a person you trusted. This doctor knew the issues with your family and could really help.
Sure.
With evaluating and diagnosing whatever problems you might have. And through elements of efficiency and health insurance and these clinics that have come along, we're really separating the compassion from healthcare. But compassion is an important element of healthcare.
Absolutely, and we've seemed to have lost that bedside manner, that compassion, that family doctor kind of vibe where you could also depend on them to come by the house if you were too sick to go out and infect other people with your virus.
And so I think we're seeing slowly that this is coming back. And I want to believe one of the things that is bringing this compassion back is the medical professionals, the healthcare professionals, the dietitians and the doctors that realize nutrition is an important part of wellness.
Absolutely.
And with that comes compassion, because they're caring about wellness. They're comparing about preventative medicine, and then they're also connecting the dots between the treatment of animals, the wellness of our planet. It's all connected.
That radical compassion when you think about the animals too. You're compassionate not only for your
immediate family
and other humans around you, but you're also compassionate for all living creatures. I know there's a lot of childhood obesity out there, and I think this book actually touches a little on that too, does it not?
Yes, it's interesting because the nutritional needs of human beings are different depending on the stage of life that we're in. We should always be getting our nutrition from plants primarily, right, if not exclusively.
And that's interesting that you brought that up because some of the talking points of the book are answering the question of safety of plant-based diets for children and the common misconceptions about plant-based diets for children. Because I know there's a lot of people thinking, well, if my child doesn't drink cow's milk or doesn't eat meat, they're not going to get enough nutrition.
They talk about just about everything, which is great. What I found interesting, I've never been a promoter of dairy milk, of animal milk. And there are so many reasons not to consume animal milk, the health reasons, the environmental reasons, and the humane reasons, the cruelty reasons. But many pediatricians especially will insist that the child consume some sort of dairy, especially if they're a picky eater. And Reshma Shah, Dr. Shah, talked about the connection between acne and dairy.
Ah, acne, yes.
She said it may not resolve all acne issues because for some people it might be more of a genetic issue. But she said the first thing she recommends is eliminating dairy.
Also, they go into some tips and strategies and a lot of mouth-watering recipes to bring all of this information to the dinner table as families explore the wonderful world of plant-based eating. Best of all, the authors don't insist that families have to commit to 100% plant-based eating if they are intimidated. You liked that about the book, didn't you? That it wasn't really preaching everyone has to go vegan, everyone has to go all plant-based, that you can...
Yeah. Well, you know me, Gary. I want everyone to go vegan. I want everyone to eat
Sure, I know. You are here
That's my dream.
You are here on this planet to make vegans, but you like the fact that it's even
inclusive.
It's even compassionate, radically compassionate in that way.
Yes.
It even takes the stand that we realize this might be a bit intimidating for you and your family to just all of a sudden stop everything, but why not try a meal a week, a meal a day that's all plant-based?
It opens the door in a loving, non-judgmental, compassionate way.
Right. And I think that's another reason why this book should be on the top of your holiday shopping list, because it sounds like something that everybody might agree with. And we're heading into a holiday now where we're all going to be sitting around a table. It's kind of that universal sit around at the table holiday called Thanksgiving. How's it going to be this year? The world is divided. We're probably going to do a lot of Zoom Thanksgivings. I know that Andy Borowitz had a funny little comment in the New Yorker this week about how Thanksgiving will be ruined on Zoom as well as around a table this year because people are going to be disagreeing about a lot of things.
Yes.
Maybe the thing that will bring us all together is an agreement about food. Doesn't seem likely, but could be if we all agree that maybe one of the side dishes or two of the side dishes or three of the side dishes that we present at Thanksgiving are plant-based.
Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts. I used to hate Brussels sprouts as a kid. I love them now.
I mean, that might be a way to solve some of the disagreements with agreeing that Brussels sprouts are tasty when prepared this way. And
they belong at the Thanksgiving table.
And hey, guess what? They're plant-based, right?
Yes, they very much are.
Okay, so we can agree with that.
We can.
We can agree that Brussels sprouts are plant-based.
Well, the thing about Thanksgiving is the ultimate family meal. And they talk in this book about family meals and the importance of family meals. And they even try to define what a family meal is, trying to be loving, non-judgmental, compassionate, and flexible with what a family is, what a meal is, when it is. But the point is gathering with two or more people to have a meal on a somewhat regular basis,
right,
is a positive thing.
Absolutely.
And I know I've always felt this was an important thing. When I was young, my dad would work a 9-to-5 job as an engineer. My mom was home most of the time. She did have different jobs from time to time, but pretty much she was the one who prepared our dinner. We would set the table, we would have a meal, and it was always an exciting thing. Dad would come home, hey, yay! And then we would sit around the table. Either we liked the food or we didn't. That didn't seem to matter. It was that stability and that focal point, which I tried to continue with my life, no matter where it was, always having the meal time. I think that's important in our life, you and I together, when we sit down, and we sit down at least twice a day. Sometimes we have 2 meals, sometimes we have more, but mostly it's 2. And that's an important time. And our society has really gotten away from that. And it's detrimental. And they talk about it in this book.
Absolutely detrimental. David L. Katz has written a nice praise for Nourish. In the end, what sets Nourish apart is not that it is expert, it is. Not that it is insightful, it is. Not that it is wise, comprehensive, or evidence-based, it is all that. What sets Nourish apart is that it is all about food for love. Mm-hmm. Embrace this book, and it all but literally embraces you back. It is a book or a hug, maybe both. Lean in and let this beautiful book nourish your understanding, your motivation, your willpower, and skill power alike. Lean in and taste the love. What could be more nourishing than that? And I know you're a fan of Dr. Katz, president of True Health Initiative and founding director of the Yale Griffin Prevention Research Center.
I first discovered David Katz when we were both on the same episode of Dr. Oz.
You and David Katz were on the same episode of Dr. Oz.
Oh, yeah, a long time ago.
I remember that now, of course.
I was promoting green juice for cancer, and it was a green juice that you had made for me that I had brought to the studio.
I remember that.
And then later, Dr. Oz and Dr. Katz were talking about, I guess, anti-cancer foods, healing foods, and I think one of the things they talked about was fish, which I wasn't very happy about.
Fish.
Boo.
Boo.
Fish are your friends, not food.
And when you go fishing, is it really going fishing or are you going killing?
Yeah, we were talking about that the other day.
We're going to go murder some fish or we're going to go fishing?
Yes. And the kind, compassionate people, quotes around kind and compassionate who feel like they can fish and then
torture the fish
and throw them back are not really doing a good thing.
But we digress.
We are digressing.
Another one of your buddies talks about this book, Nourish. Michael Greger, MD. I know you know Michael, and Michael knows you, and it's a real love fest whenever you two are together. He says, Nourish, the definitive plant-based nutrition guide for families, is the book plant-based and plant-curious families have been waiting for. It is meticulously researched, clear, and insightful. If you have questions about raising plant-based children, this is the book you can trust for the answers. I know a lot of people who are raising children now, very close to my heart, and I see how they're feeding their children, and I'm concerned.
Yes.
And really concerned, because I know that they're feeding them out of love, but the food that they are feeding them is so dangerous for them. Not to mention, I know they discuss this in the book as well, but the type 2 diabetes implications that some of these foods can bring on.
There have been lots of different methods for parents raising children to feed their children, and they talk about some of the dynamics in this book. I'm not going to go into detail because there are numerous ones, but these ideas that we give a child a sugary treat as a prize for doing something good. It's the wrong message. Blueberries can be a treat. Something that isn't good for us should not be given that value.
Right.
Because it goes through the rest of our lives, and it's really hard to disconnect that reward feeling for something it really isn't rewarding us.
Another friend of yours, another person that you're very close to, has written a little blurb about this book called Nourish. John Robbins.
I know John.
Yes, of course you do. I've saved the best for last. He's the best-selling author and president of 650,000 plus member Food Revolution Network. He says Nourish is simply the book for any family wanting to raise healthy children. At a time when companies marketing junk foods are spending billions to get our children hooked for life, and confusion reigns about the pros and cons of various diets, you have cause for gratitude. This wonderful book will fortify you and your whole family against the predatory practices of industrial food companies, and it is also jam-packed with useful and practical guidance that is 100% supported by science. Get it, read it, and heed it. It will guide you and your family on a delicious, convenient, and exquisitely health-promoting food journey. If you want your children to thank you for the rest of their lives, get this book. Now, I've sat around a table with John and Deo. When he speaks, I listen. I'm imploring all of you out there in listening land, pick up a copy of this book.
There's so many little details in this book, and I can't bring up all of them, but I did pull out a few that I didn't get to talk with Brenda and Reshma about, and one of them just made me smile. You know, from time to time I talk about how healthy foods have changed over the decades, or the foods that we have thought were healthy have changed over the decades. because we learn more about them. And one of them that I talked about was wheat germ and wheat bran. Because there was a time, what was it, the 70s? 80s or something?
I can't remember that far back, but yeah.
When wheat bran and wheat germ were like, that's the healthy stuff. You got to put it on everything.
That was the thing that tree huggers put on everything. I remember people talking about that. Oh, you're kind of all that wheat germy kind of thing, aren't you?
So they have a little paragraph I pulled out that says, excessive fiber can be a problem if concentrated fiber sources such as wheat bran are used regularly. Wheat bran is very high in phytates and can inhibit the absorption of minerals, so it is best not used as a regular feature in the diet.
We've been misled in this life about food from the very beginning.
We're learning.
And we're learning. Okay, I'll read one more because I know he's your favorite doctor. Joel Furman Md, New York Times bestselling author and president of Nutritional Research Foundation and a personal friend of Karen Hartglass, says about Nourish, what we eat in our childhood has far-reaching and powerful effects on our health throughout our entire life. Nourish is a well-researched and authoritative work that gives parents the most accurate information to assure their child's well-being. But more than that, this book can help anyone at any age understand and apply the foundational principles of nutritional excellence to prevent health problems, support our emotional well-being, and even protect our planet. That was wonderful, Joel Furman.
Well,
MD.
These are all people. You brought up a number of people. Joel Furman, John Robbins, Michael Greger, and Brenda Davis. I don't know Reshma Shah personally, so I cannot say it of her, but I'm assuming she's part of this group. They walk the walk.
Yes, they do.
They do what they preach.
They talk the talk and they walk the walk.
Yep.
Or walk the talk. They're the walkie-talkies. They walk it and they talk it and they practice what they preach it.
And you can see it when you look at them.
Families are where we learn how to eat.
That's where we learn.
That's where we learn how to eat.
So when we learn things that may not be the best for us, they are really hard to break away from.
Yeah. I wrote a show and performed it for almost a year at a theater in San Jose, and it was called Eating Disorder, Eating Dad Order. And this was before I became a vegan. I was battling all of my life with diets. It doesn't make sense when you're a child, and yet you have to have an adult tell you, someone that you look up to and to respect, tell you that, oh no, that's okay. Like your doctor. We raise these animals so we can kill them and eat them. And that's just wrong. And to the child, you listen to that and you say, wait, that doesn't make sense, but this is an adult that I'm supposed to trust and respect telling me this. And I'm sure that confuses the child. I know it confused me. I wrote an entire show about it, which was my point. Then finally saw the light. So
we do have a lot of confusion. And I want to wrap up talking about the coronavirus and the recommendations for coronavirus and how it all connects with everything we've just been talking about. This coronavirus came on us pretty quickly. Most of us weren't expecting it. We didn't know how to handle it. And there have been all kinds of recommendations of what to do and what not to do. And they keep conflicting each other. But I think the foundation is clear. And one thing we don't hear about, unfortunately, from enough places is the nutrition aspect. If we are all eating a nutrient-dense diet and getting the vitamins that we need, getting the minerals that we need, getting all the nutrients we need, we're in a much better place to either prevent getting the coronavirus or at least healing with it without profound repercussions. And then the other thing is getting the sleep we need, getting the exercise, getting the water we need. This isn't just for coronavirus. This is for all chronic diseases. This is for a quality life for as long as we live. And these are important elements that we just don't hear enough of. And then the other thing, of course, is the hygiene areas. Wash your hands, wear a mask. But the point is, there's so much confusion. There's been confusion for decades, more than decades, about nutrition. And hopefully we're clearing that up over the years. And this book gives a lot of great information to help do that. And you can just relate it to everything that's going on today in your world. Eat well.
Yes.
Eat plants. Get the nutrients you need. Keep your immune system functioning and strong. And Brenda and Reshma, they said it's not necessary to over-supplement They do recommend fortified foods and certain supplements that we should take. They're not recommending really high amounts of supplementation. You can get all that information in their book. I know some people have been really jumping into supplementing extra this season, and some of that is controversial. That's a choice that you make. But eating well, sleeping well, exercising, very important. Breathing, trying to minimize your stress, meditation. This is our message over and over and over again.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I really do. Well, of course I do. I agree with you because you're right about everything. And if you could see what she just did to me, she stuck her tongue out at me. I don't know why she would do such a thing. Esteemed guests out there in listening land, Karen Hartglass just stuck her tongue out at me. Anyway, if you're plant curious, if you've seen movies like The Game Changer and you want to know what's it all about, visit Responsible Eating and Living and get Nourish for your family.
That's it, Gary. We're out of time.
Are we out of time?
Yes, we are.
Wow, look at that.
I also just want to add one more thing, that there are a number of interviews that I've had with Brenda, and they're all worth listening to. So I'm going to link them to this program if you want to check them out, because the information, even though it came out a few years ago, is still more than relevant today.
Great. I can't wait to meet Brenda, and I can't wait to meet Reshma.
We will.
Yeah.
One day when they let us out.
Well, Brenda will have to go to Calgary.
Yes, but she's had a lot of different conferences.
And Reshma will have to go to Palo Alto.
Yes, that might be easy to do.
I love Palo Alto.
I know, Palo Alto.
Yeah, I love Stanford University where Reshma teaches because that's where I met you.
That's
face to
right.
face. Yeah.
And there's a nice trail there to walk. We should get there one
Yeah.
day. Yeah. Okay, everybody, thanks for listening. We love babbling about food and sharing it with you. Okay.
Have a delicious week.